back in San Francisco, where I spent the biggest part of my adult life here. But now I've been in Singapore for the last 13 years. And I want to tell you about a problem. It's different than the other presentations. I want to tell you about a problem we haven't solved yet. And I'm calling it blended health education. I'm, as I mentioned, I'm Associate Provost at National University of Singapore. Fun man, my colleague, has a NUS bear. You don't want to show. So where I run the learning analytics group. But the work I want to talk about today is about a problem that the World Health Organization has said estimated about 13 million healthcare workers short by 2035. And so there's a significant need to train physicians and other healthcare professionals around the world. And this is a problem that's worse in the developing world. And I'm going to use my experiences in Singapore to help provide a solution for this, because there's really no sustainable way that we have to solve this particular problem. The quality of medical education throughout the world is variable, quite variable. Part of that is that many parts of the world are using outdated teaching materials, and the faculty there don't know how to access the internet and find and assess materials that they need to be able to teach their class in a quality way. In addition, their own training may not be up to par as well, and they have had very little in the way of medical education training themselves. So as a result, physician ability throughout the world is quite variable. So there's about 2,800 medical schools around the world. Outside of a few big partnerships like Duke University and National University of Singapore or Cornell University in Qatar, there's very little sharing of curriculum across these 2,800 medical schools. But these big partnerships are very expensive, on the order of millions of dollars. So what is the rest of the world supposed to do to be able to get access to quality medical education? So it's really, I describe this as a really opportunity place to reimagine and to be able to disrupt and solve this problem. It's a MOOC, which provides a lot of information and content, is not an adequate answer to this, because the information that students would get needs to be contextualized, it needs to be regionalized. Medical students need to take that information and understand how to apply that in a clinical setting. And the clinical setting varies depending on whether you're at Duke or at Singapore or in Africa. It needs to be localized. So a simple MOOC that gets information to everyone is not the answer. So I'm going to propose a solution, and I would propose that Reimagine Award would help me with the solution. And it comes from my work at Duke NUS as the Vice Dean of Education. So I went to Singapore as Duke faculty to be able to bring together the two institutions and create a new type of medical school in Singapore. So after hiring the faculty, I really assigned them to the task of your job is to be able to bring the Duke curriculum to Singapore. At the time, this is 13 years ago, Duke had a very traditional curriculum, basically lectures and then a test. So what we decided to do was use the opportunity to relook at education and medical education and ask how do we keep aligned to the Duke curriculum. So what we did was we flipped the classroom. This is 13 years ago, and so this was not something that was really appreciated as something that could be done. So we took the lectures from Duke and I gave it to the students, and we gave the students goals and objectives, and we asked them to learn ahead of time independently. And then the other thing that we innovated on was we asked the students to also learn in teams, so they took advantage of the peer learning that would happen. So in class, we only met twice a week in class, another radical difference from being in class from morning and night 5 days a week. But they were in class only twice a week for their curriculum, and it's something that's called Team Lead. We gave the students lectures mostly from Duke to keep our students aligned to the Duke curriculum. We asked them to learn ahead of class. We made sure that they learned, because the first thing that happened when they came into class twice a week was we gave them a test on the material. We did that because if they didn't, we knew that if we didn't test them, they would not be accountable for that, and they wouldn't necessarily study as hard as they would. So they learned the material out of class, they had an assessment, but before they got any information about that, about the results, they then moved into their teams. And these are teams that they had throughout the entire year. And in these teams, they talked about the answer that they came up with, and then came up with the team answer as well. So a student's grade was both a combination of both their individual work and then their teamwork. And then afterwards, they met, this was in the morning, and they had lunch, and they came back, and we gave them another set of problems that was open book, open internet, because we did not want them to be just about memorization. Medical schools needed to be about applying, about learning how to use that information, and learn to use information that's not available to them in their knowledge, but that they looked it up on the internet. And what changed, though, is our faculty in Singapore were not lecturers, they're facilitators. We taught them to be able to facilitate the conversation. They didn't have to be experts, but instead we put the experts into the room, for instance, and they were called on only when the students had finished discussing it, because once we started the experts to discuss, the students quieted down. They didn't discuss anymore. So the job of the facilitator was mostly to keep the faculty from saying the answer and giving the discussion. Okay, so the success, this was a great success, even though everyone thought that this would not work in Singapore. It was a great success, and Duke, it changed the way that Duke taught its classroom. But the problem I wanted to present today was really about the first world problem, and then suggested a solution is blended health. And the way that we moved education from Durham to Singapore, shouldn't it be possible for us to then take what we learned in Singapore and be able to distribute it in a scalable way to other parts of the world in a low-cost method? So part of the problem is intellectual property is an issue. Schools with nice curriculums, like at Duke's, they protect that. They don't like to share it because it's worth quite a bit to them, and they've developed it. So, but schools would be willing to give up certain lectures. So the idea of BHE is to source materials from all over the world for the pre-work, but then also pair it with the works similar to what we did in Singapore with the in-class problem sets that could be facilitated by an educational facilitator who did not have to be an expert. If the local community had experts, they could come in and sit in the room. But what also would be possible is that if they did not have experts in a particular area, we could bring that in by video, because they weren't the sage on the stage, they were really guides on the side. And then that could be tolerated well by students. Students would learn as both individuals and in peers, and in their peers, they would learn they would do most of the work themselves. It would only be these facilitators and these experts would do the last 5 or 10% of the learning that students need to do. So again, a scalable solution, because most of the work students could actually teach each other and provide quality information. And our idea is to be able to scale this both into nursing and in pharmacy and other health professions. So we have a very experienced team that's ready to get started. We've got an advisory board with really top academic leaders all over the world. And we just want to say that we're really ready to fill this important void in high-quality health and education in the world. Thank you very much.
Take a note, close to my heart, being a